Hi guys, I'm Erica. Welcome to Hack Your Health. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to identify, create, and critique a logical argument. The reason why I'm making this video is because I feel that being able to identify and produce and evaluate a logical argument is one of the best skills that you can have when it comes to doing research for yourself and making choices about your health. And I think that in the world of nutrition and the world of medical claims that are found online, it's very important to be able to evaluate how they're drawing their conclusions and decide for yourself whether you think that that argument is sound. So as many of you probably already know, I have a degree in philosophy, and that means that for many years I studied how to make arguments, how to critique arguments, and basically how to question your thoughts at kind of the deepest level in order to get the closest to knowledge and the closest to the truth. That's really the goal of philosophy, and that's basically the goal of reason as well, because when you're reasoning, you're trying to remove all of your preconceived assumptions, your preconceived notions, as well as your emotions and your opinions, and only draw the conclusions that you can from what is in reality. So it means that a lot of our preconceived notions get removed because they don't end up to be truthful when challenged with critical thinking. When you are presenting an argument, the first thing that you need to do is define your terms. And the first thing that you need to do when you're evaluating an argument is the same thing. You need to figure out what the meaning and the definition is of the word that's being used in that context. So, for example, God is often talked about a lot in philosophy, and that is a very tricky word. For one thing, because in some schools of thought, it's not considered okay to put attributes on God, so you can't really easily define it. But also, in different religions and in different parts of the world, there's a very different conception of what the word God means. So if you're going to go by Christian theology, for example, there would be one God, all-seeing, all-powerful, and very involved in judgment, for example, along with other ideas. Whereas a person with a background of Hinduism, for example, might conceive of as a god, or even ancient Greek mythology as well, as being one of many, and they have different roles. So there will be a god of wisdom, there will be a god of war, or whatever, and you would kind of appease these different gods for different reasons, or they would symbolize different things. So if two people are having a conversation and they have these two completely different definitions of the word God, then chances are that a lot of their disagreements are going to come from a different definition of the word itself, and the arguments that they're making are probably going to not have much of a purpose because they haven't actually defined the terms. So the first thing that needs to be done when you are doing this kind of research, in my opinion, is you need to figure out the definition of what you're working with. So whether it's the definition of Crohn's disease, or the definition of a diet that you're researching, or the definition of a specific nutrient, being aware of what is being discussed precisely is the very first step. And this also means that if you define something right at the very beginning, the definition can't change later. So sometimes people try to make an argument with one definition of a word, and then when they run into trouble, they kind of try to change the definition later. And that's not considered acceptable in philosophy. You need to have a very clear and defined definition that does not change unless you are intentionally setting out to change it because you've reevaluated your ideas. So that's kind of a basic concept, is that the definition of terms is very important when you are researching or thinking critically about something. So the next thing that you need to do is evaluate the argument itself. So in philosophy, an argument is not something that's angry. It's more just a presentation of a series of statements and their conclusion, essentially. So if you're arguing a point, it means that you have a set statement that you have decided is your conclusion, and then you have several different things that you are going to use to justify how you arrived at that conclusion. That would all in all be your argument. So the form of the argument is usually, to go a simple route, you have premises and then you have a conclusion. So the most commonly given beginner philosophy, beginner logic thing is Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Socrates is a man. You're saying that if Socrates is there, then a man is there. They're the same thing in that sense. And then you say all men are mortal. So that means that without exception, if something is a man, then that thing is also mortal. So since Socrates is a man, then it follows that Socrates is mortal. And often we would put this in symbolic form. So it's like if A then B, if B then C, therefore if A then C. And it gets extremely complicated, but this is the basic sort of way that you can tell whether an argument is sound. If the conclusion must be true, if the premises are true, then it is a sound argument. It's also important for those premises that you've used to justify your conclusion are also valid, and that means that they're true. So let's say Socrates is a man, and Socrates is considered sort of one of the fathers of philosophy. So Socrates of Western philosophy, I should say. So he was an ancient Greek, and he was a man who questioned, and he started this Socratic method. So that means that you're just asking a series of questions and kind of getting somebody to contradict themselves. So instead of contrasting your ideas themselves, you're continuing to ask and continuing to ask and continuing to ask, and eventually the inconsistencies of that person's views will become apparent because they'll start to contradict themselves under further questioning. And his students, Plato and Aristotle, were the ones who actually wrote down his ideas and then added their own ideas. So the basics of logic and modern Western philosophy come from that study of these people, and then it got built and built and built upon over the following millennia. All that is to say that Socrates was a man, so Socrates is a man is true, and all men are mortal. So we can look at the world and we can say, well, have we found any contradictory examples? Have we found any men who have turned out not to be mortal? And the answer to that is no. So far as we know, this is also true. So that means that it's also valid, is that you can say that those statements are also true. So when you're going into evaluating statements that are made in terms of nutrition or in terms of other subjects, it's very useful to look at the things that are being presented and see whether the conclusion can actually be derived from the statements that precede them. So an example would be, since some animals can make B12, that means that humans can also make B12. So let's look at that, for example. So some animals can make B12. That is true, but you'll notice that that's a lot weaker than all animals can make B12. If all animals can make B12 and humans are animals, that would mean that logically humans could make B12, but that's not what it says. It says some animals can make B12. And then you can say humans are animals. That is not strong enough to say the conclusion that humans can make B12. It doesn't say that they can't, but it also doesn't prove that they can. It just doesn't give enough information. So I would just suggest to start looking at those articles, if you haven't already, in that kind of critical manner and really asking yourself, can this conclusion be drawn from the set of facts that are presented? And people do this a lot with studies as well, because they'll grab a study and it will say something that's related, but then when you go to read the article, it will draw a far stronger conclusion than the study did. And that's why I usually check the references. Not always. I also make mistakes, and I'm telling you this, like, apply this to my videos as well. You also want to go through and make sure that the premises themselves are valid, meaning that they're actually true. Because if you draw a conclusion, even if it's logical, but it's based on untrue statements going in, then you can easily get an untrue conclusion. So just because it's a logically well-structured argument does not mean that the conclusion will be true unless the premises are also true. So those are the things that are most important to check right away, because if you find fault with those, you can just throw the conclusion right out the window, because it does not tell you whether or not it's true. It could be true, it could be not true, who knows, basically. And the other thing that's really important in critical thinking and in philosophy in general is this removal of personal bias, and that often comes in the form of emotion. So having an emotion, of course, in the world is something to pay attention to, and I'm all for like mindfulness and meditation and intuition and all of that. Like, I do base some of my decisions on those things. But when it comes to presenting an argument, that is really not the place for appeals to emotion. And that's where I think that we have gone very strangely off the mark in a lot of our online discourse. And I try very hard to not be a hypocrite and to practice this myself. But basically, when you're making an argument, the point is to have it stand on its own. It's not a part of you. If you're going to make a logical argument, it needs to really be able to be defended. You need to be able to say, look, this is the evidence, these are my premises, this is what makes them true, this is exactly what I mean by them, and since I mean that, therefore, if all of these things are true, or whatever formula you're using to arrive, because you can also use untrue in other ways, if all those things are like that, then this must also be true. That's kind of the point of these kinds of arguments, and then you can refine your ideas by having them criticized. And that's part of the thing that I like most about YouTube, is that I can put ideas out and then people can criticize them or support them or just add to them in any way that they like, and then you learn more. And that basically is the idea behind it, is that it's not about being right, it's not about proving other people wrong, it's about the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of wisdom and basically the betterment of the human species, because by working together we can arrive at better conclusions and therefore make better decisions. And that's been really useful to me, because I find that there's a huge amount of misinformation. Even if you look into cholesterol or saturated fat, all of these things that we were taught were bad for us, if you look into what studies have actually been done, there's really a very strong lack of evidence for that. For how many times it's been repeated, and that's, I forget who made that quote, but you can make things into truth either by them actually being true or by repeating them a whole bunch of times. I feel like they're going into the second category, where when you look further at what the evidence is or what reasoning was used to arrive at that conclusion, it seems like there isn't much. So that's why I would just suggest looking more deeply into things before you believe them, especially in the world of nutrition, but really everywhere in life. So I'm gonna leave it at that. And if you found this helpful, let me know if you have been using similar thought processes, which I'm sure you are, because I think there's a lot of very critical-minded people watching these videos, which I appreciate a lot. And let me know what your thoughts were or how you arrived at the conclusions you have in terms of your health. I'd be really interested to hear that. And yeah, stick around, and in the comments section I always like to hear people's feedback or even debate in a respectful manner. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please push like, and if you want to see more of my videos, then you can always subscribe. And if you have suggestions of videos that you would like to see, please let me know in the comments below. I'm doing my best to post every Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so you can look forward to a weekly video if you do subscribe. And that's all for now, and all the best to you on your healing journey. Thank you for watching. Bye.